Resident Evil 4.
I've always preferred horror movies to video games. In theory, horror games should add the element of fear by adding a layer of immersion. What actually tends to happen is the opposite. Video games aren't perfect. Bugs, strange textures, weird AI, and many other issues are pretty common even among the biggest AAA titles, and these issues actually take away from the immersion and result in the game being less scary than a movie with the same plot would be. On top of this, movies tend to clock in around 2 hours, while games are typically over 10 hours long. Your brain gets used to the repetition rather quickly. This is why most horror games only seem to be scary for the first few hours. Many horror games also tend to bank on the fear-inducing elements and neglect a lot of the other crucial aspects in making a good game. Resident Evil 4, on the other hand, is an amazing game that just happens to be pretty scary. Resident Evil is probably the most well-known horror franchise in gaming. The franchise was first introduced in 1996 and has since expanded into other media markets with many films, comics, and even a television series. The first 3 mainline Resident Evil games were strictly horror survival games. These games were all extremely well received and have their own strong legacies, but the fixed camera view makes it difficult for a lot of people, including myself, to give them a proper chance. Though with the sheer size of these games and the limits of the hardware they were released on, there was no other options. However, in 2005, Capcom released what might have been their biggest leap forward in the franchise, Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 came out as a GameCube exclusive in 2005. Yeah, I'm not really sure why a horror game that gained popularity on the PlayStation came out for a console meant for kids, but that's besides the point. Like the previous titles, the game is categorized as a survival horror, though it is much more than just that. The power of the GameCube allowed for technological advancements that wouldn't have been possible on earlier titles. The first and most notable being a camera that isn't in a fixed position, which allowed for more dynamic and engaging gameplay. The third-person camera view allowed for a lot more exploration. Resident Evil 4 doesn't just feel like a horror game, it feels like an excellent action movie with horror elements, and with those horror elements not constantly being shoved down your throat, it actually somehow makes the game feel scarier. Another welcome change in Resident Evil 4 is the size of the world. In previous Resident Evil titles, you were confined to a fairly small space throughout the entire game. On Resident Evil 4, the scenery is constantly changing, keeping the game feeling fresh at all times. The story is bonkers. Without spoiling too much, you play as everyone's favorite Resident Evil bad boy, Leon Kennedy, and you're tasked with the mission of rescuing the president's daughter from a sketchy cult. The further you get into the game, the weirder this cult turns out to be. It's the perfect amount of ridiculousness, and again makes you realize that this is not a typical horror game, and instead it's almost like a cheesy, dark action movie in a good way. You could replace Leon Kennedy with Keanu Reeves, and the game would still remain largely unchanged. The gameplay is perfect for the type of game this is. It feels somewhat clunky and janky, as a good survival horror game should. Honestly, you wouldn't want smooth Call of Duty-esque gunplay in a game like this, because it would be way too easy. Even on Resident Evil 7 and 8, you'll notice the developers really embrace this style of gameplay, and it keeps the player on their toes at all times. You'll often find yourself finishing off a horde with 0 remaining bullets. Even as you progress in the game and get stronger weapons, the enemies never feel too easy. If I had to make a complaint about the game, it would be regarding the inventory navigation. Of course, it's a survival horror game, so only being able to carry a certain amount of items just makes sense. I just wish there was a hotkey option to map certain items to buttons, so you wouldn't have to spend too much time in the menus. Though the one advantage to this is it allows you to regain your composure and think of a plan during a hectic fight. This is also me just nitpicking, and I don't think it'll be an issue in the remake. Resident Evil 4 has been ported to pretty much every console at this point. My introduction to the game was actually on the iPod Touch, though I've since played it on at least 5 different consoles. My favorite version is without a doubt for the Nintendo Wii. Although I often dislike motion controls, there is something about it that just feels right when playing a survival horror game. I most recently beat it for the Nintendo Switch, and that experience is what led me to making this video. Although I'd be lying if I said I wasn't excited for the remake, I was initially a little bit disappointed with the announcement. I would love to get a remake of the first Resident Evil, as even the remastered version of that game is difficult to get into for most modern gamers. The HD remaster of Resident Evil 4 on modern consoles holds up extremely well, and I encourage everyone to play that version before the remake, as you never know what may be added or removed by the developers. Resident Evil 4 is often regarded as the best Resident Evil game and one of the best games of all time. You can see the influence this game had on hundreds of modern third-person shooters, from Gears of War to The Last of Us. Like always, I'm giving away a copy of the PS4 version to someone who likes, comments, and subscribes to this video, but even if you don't win, I recommend picking up a copy just to experience this game. Let me know your thoughts on the original and the remake down below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.